Alright, so in this lesson, I know the notes look a little strange. What I decided to do is I decided to take some notes that were already done and kind of make it my own by adding in a few more things as well. So kind of follow along with me on this. I'm going to be teaching you how to graph quadratics in standard form. So you have ax squared plus bx plus c. This is called the standard form of a quadratic. There's something important about the standard form of a quadratic. Your a is your shape of the quadratic. If this is a positive number, it's going to be opening upward. If your a, not your x, but your number in front, your coefficient, if it's a negative, it's going to be opening downward. The other important thing about standard form is your c. Your c is always your y-intercept, always. Your b plays a role in a little bit, but right off the bat, you should know when you look at a quadratic whether your shape opens up or opens down. Because if this is a positive, it opens up. If it's a negative, it opens down. And what your y-intercept is. On the first thing of notes, it talks to you about something called an axis of symmetry. In a quadratic, an axis of symmetry is an imaginary line that cuts the quadratic directly in half. So this side is congruent to this side. And this is always an x equals some number line, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. The very bottom point right here, this is called a minimum value. So whenever it's asking for the minimum or maximum value, if you have a quadratic that's opening downward like this, you will know its maximum value. This highest point is called your maximum value. And this point is how low it goes down on the y. This point, your maximum value, is how high it goes up on the y. The axis of symmetry, this imaginary line, always goes through the vertex. Always. So if you know your vertex coordinate, you will always know your minimum or your axis of symmetry. The next thing on the notes it talks to you about is you can always graph a quadratic equation if we know a couple things. Number one, the vertex, which I'm going to teach you how to find. Number two, your AOS, your axis of symmetry, which has to do with your vertex. Number three is your A number, and this is your shape, whether it opens up or it opens down. And number four, you need to know, it's not in the notes, but what your y-intercept would be. These are the four things that are going to matter with your graphing of a quadratic. Number one, your vertex, which is this middle point. Once you know your vertex, you can figure out your axis of symmetry, and then you would graph your shape, and then plot your y-intercept and plot all the points. So, in the next part of the notes, it talks about graphing a quadratic in standard form. There is something called a negative b over 2a point. And this is how you find your x coordinate for your vertex. This is your x number in your vertex. So this is how you find your x number in your vertex. And in the note, it's box like this. Boop, a big pink box. This is the main formula that you need to know to find your x number for your vertex. And then we have an example. It says, let's try to graph one. And it gives you an equation. Y equals 2x squared minus 4x minus 1. Okay, let's look at this for a second. Do we know the shape? We're just going to list everything that we know right off the bat. The shape is your A, which is 2. I also know my -1 is my y-intercept. And I'm going to write this as a coordinate, 0, -1. Okay, so I'm going to draw my graph right here. I know that this is going to go through 0, -1 right here. That's my y-intercept. I also know my shape is a positive, so it's going to be going up. So it's going to look something like this. It's going to be down here somewhere. Because I can't have it up here because it would not cross through my y-intercept. I know it has to go through my y-intercept somewhere. Now, on the previous things that we wrote, I got to find my vertex. That's the very first thing, vertex. Look, this is your formula for the vertex. To find your x number, you're going to take the negative b and divide it by 2 times your a. So let's plug this in. Remember, this is my a, this is my b, and this is my c. So negative b, which is -4, see my b is a -4, over 2 times your a. My a is 2, which is going to give me negative and a negative is a positive 4 over 2 times 2, which is going to give me 1. What I just found was my x number for my vertex. Because your vertex is a point. It's a coordinate. Now, the way you find your y, I got to figure out what this number is. You're going to take your x number and plug it back into the x's to figure out your y. So if I know my x number for my vertex is 1, I'm going to plug a 1 into here and a 1 into here. So I'm going to say 2 times 1 squared. See how I plugged that into here? Minus 4 times, I'm going to plug a 1 into this x, minus 1. And this is going to give me, see how it says y equals? Y equals whatever this answer is. So let's do this. 1 squared is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. -4 times 1 is -4. Minus 1. So this is going to be 2 minus 4, which is -2 minus 1, which is -3. That is my y number for my vertex. So I'm going to go over 1 and down 1, 2, 3. This is my vertex. Now, the second thing you're going to do is, once I know my vertex, I'm going to plot my axis of symmetry. Your axis of symmetry, I told you, always goes through the vertex, right here. This is the imaginary line that cuts it in half. And it's an equation. It's x equals, where does it cross my x-axis? Look, +1. Your axis of symmetry is always your x number for your vertex. So my equation of my axis of symmetry, you always write it as an equation as x equals 1. Now, after I plot my axis of symmetry, I'm going to plot my shape. My shape is my A. My A in this is 2. So I'm going to go up 2 over 1. But since it's a quadratic, I do it on both sides. Up 2 over 1. And I just do it one time. This is called your initial shape. And then I graph this. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the quadratic. That's that example. I give you a couple more examples to try. And we're going to try these examples. The next example, I say y equals x squared minus 2x minus 1. Number 1, we got to find my vertex. And remember, it's x equals negative b over 2 times a. And let's just figure out what my a is. My a is a positive 1. There's an invisible 1. My b is a negative 2. And my c is negative 1. Remember what your negative 1 is? That's your y-intercept. Also, so your y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, is 0, comma, negative 1. So if I have my graph 0, comma, negative 1, is just coincidence. It's the same spot as it was last graph. All right, let's plug this in to figure out my x number. X equals negative, I should probably just do this in a different color. Negative, now I'm going to plot my b. My b is negative 2 over 2 times my a is 1. Negative 2 becomes a positive 2 over 2, which equals 1. So my vertex is 1 for my x. Once again, this is just total coincidence how you get the same number for your x as we did for the last example. I'm going to plug a 1 back in to my x's to figure out my y. Second step, plug the x into equation to solve for your y number for your vertex. So I'm going to plug a 1 into here, a 1 into here, and do the math. So I get y equals 1 squared is 1 times 1 is 1. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 minus 1. 1 minus 2 is negative 1, and another negative 1 gives me a negative 2. Here's my vertex. 1, negative 2, right here. There's my vertex. My axis of symmetry is the imaginary line that cuts it in half, and this is going to be a messed up thing because it's not straight, but that's just me. They're always straight. It's x equals 1. This is the imaginary line that cuts it in half. And then I'm going to plot my initial shape. In this equation, my initial shape is your a. So I'm going to go up 1 from my vertex, over 1 on the right, up 1 over 1 on the left. And there's your quadratic. All right. Let's do the next one. I'm going to have you guys try this next one. I'm going to have you guys pause this with each step. I'm going to ask you guys to do something. I'm going to have you pause it to see if you can try. Very first thing we got to find is my, let's do this. See if you can label your A, B, and C. Pause the video and see if you can label your A, B, and C. Okay, if you paused it, you should have got your A, which is your shape, is a positive 2. Your B, which plays into your X number for your vertex, is 6. And your C, which is your Y-intercept, is 3. Okay, so if I were to have my graph, I know it's going to cross the Y at 3. Might as well just make this graph. Okay. Now, the very first step is to find your vertex. And remember, x equals negative b over 2 times your a. All right, x equals negative b over 2 times your a. Negative, my b is 6 over 2 times my a, which is 2. So this is going to give me negative 6 over 4, which is going to give me a decimal answer. I think it's 1.2. I'm going to divide it. I'm going to divide I think it's 1.5. 6 divided by 4 is 1.5. 1.5. That's my, oops, sorry. Let's do this right down here. 1.5, that's my x number. I still gotta find my y. 1.5 is, here's 1 and then 1/2 right here. Now I gotta figure out how much I go up or down for my y. So I'm gonna plug 1.5 into here and into here. I'm gonna use my calculator so I don't have to do anything by hand. I'm gonna go 2 parentheses 1.5 squared plus 6 parentheses 1.5, close the parenthesis, plus 3, and I get 16. Oh. Sorry, guys. It's a negative 1.5. I was wondering, like, wait, something's wrong with this. I just went back and visually just redid the math. Negative 6 divided by 4 is negative 1.5. All right, that makes way more sense. All right. so I'm going to plug in a negative 1.5 into here. I'm going to do the whole thing again. 2 parentheses negative 1.5 squared plus 6 parentheses negative 1.5 plus 3. And it's going, there we go. That's much better. Negative 1.5. So my vertex is, it's negative 1.5 and negative 1 and 0.5, which is going to be right here. There's my vertex. My axis of symmetry is going to be this imaginary line that cuts it in half, which is x equals, it's always your x number, negative 1.5. Now, I'm going to plot my shape. What's my shape? 2. So from the vertex, I'm going to go up 1, 2, and then over 1. Initially, up 1, 2, and then over 1 on the other side. Connect it, all 4 points, and this is your quadratic for this example right here.